Hi everyone, welcome to our second lecture. The theme of today's lecture is all about partnerships. So I thought we'll start with one of those fabulous quotes that we hear all the time. It takes a village to raise a child. Now, what we know is that in our current world, we don't have our villages that we used to have. So what does it mean to us? It means that in society, our lives revolve often around our children and so on, but it also should be part of our wider community. Our teachers, parents, and community, they will become quite tied together, and they need to, because we don't have that standard village that's helping us to raise our child. You might live in a family that has an extended family, or you might have your chosen family of close friends and so on. But when it comes time for child rearing and care, it usually is somebody that is in the childcare system that you're usually paying for, or it's somebody that you are sending your children to in a school-based system. So we need to build that idea of a village around the relationships that you will build between the childcare workers, the childcare organisation itself, the caregivers, and the schools and our wider community. So in this unit, we discuss that relationship and the really important role that we have as early childhood educators in how we develop those really good, positive lines of communication. So what research shows us is the continued need for continuity of care. Continuity in the lives of children is the way that it provides the best circumstances for learning across all our domains. This is so necessary with the relationships that are held by the child, the home, school, family, community, and so on. With that question, what does it mean to you? It takes a village to raise a child. You may have responded by saying that you really enjoy children and that you want to be a great early childhood educator. But it means that you are also going to be dealing with all the caregivers as well, because often it is a business in childcare, and in schools it's a long-term relationship. So you have to look at how you are building those relationships, and building relationships with the parents. Oh, that's a whole different ball game to building relationships with the children. So even our best teachers can really struggle with working out how to build effective relationships with parents and caregivers, particularly when you have very different ideals and opinions, and that can lead to lots of miscommunication. So let's look at this idea of what are partnerships. So if we look at the absolute definition of a partnership, at its core, it's a relationship between equals. Now, sometimes what I see in early childhood educators is at times what appears to be an imbalance of power, where sometimes the educator feels they have more power than the caregiver, and sometimes the caregiver feels they have less power because of things. And then occasionally in schools you'll find a caregiver who potentially feels they have more power than the educator, and that can lead to really poor dynamics that are going on. And a lot of it is your confidence as an educator in dealing with parents, and that will grow in your first year. It is a bit tricky, and understanding how you interact with the caregivers and the parents and everything else that's going on, it does become very tricky. It gets much better as you get more experienced. So when we look at what our early years framework says, we want to look at this family school partnerships. They are collaborative partnerships, and we want to have activities that involve the staff, the parents, and other family members of students at the school. We want it to be based on this idea of mutual trust and respect and shared responsibility for the education of the children and the young people. Now, why is it so important? Families are our first educators of children, and they must continue to influence their children's learning and development during school years and, of course, afterwards. On the other hand, schools are a really important and vital responsibility. They help to nurture and teach our future generations. And families have to trust the schools that they're providing that perfect educational foundation for their children's future. At the same time, schools need to recognise the primary role of the family. So that's why we all have to work in partnership. We can't have these unequal balances of power where one party feels that they must lord it over the other and so on. We have to work together to create a really high level of parental and community involvement. What has been shown time and time again is that strong positive involvement is strongly related to improved student learning, obviously attendance, and ultimately behaviour as well. Family involvement has a major impact on the student learning, regardless of the social or cultural background of the family. And it's pivotal to high quality education in schools. The aim of the Family School Partnerships Framework is to encourage a sustainable and effective partnership between all members of the school community. So what we want the partnerships to do is make sure that we view each partner as equally valuable. We want them to respect all the different contributions and their student needs and preferences. We want to both sides to actively address the barriers to involvement. And we want to make sure we're creating really good programs, opportunities and learning. We want to give families lots of opportunities to contribute to the school's decision-making and governance. And we want to make sure that we are contributing to the personal satisfaction for principals and teachers. It requires commitment from all parties, and lots of families need special arrangements, extra support. We want them to be actively involved in their children's school lives and to help their children get the most. So families understand the education system is important and the difficulties that schools face, and schools need to understand how to engage the families so we can all work together to really create the perfect experience for all children and build a beautiful community. So families have a particularly important influence on children's development, as does the home environment and the relationships and interactions with all adults. They are the key to building healthy, responsive brains. Now, if we look at this from the point of view of partnerships, what we're doing is we're making sure that those partnerships are really building the quality of the early years setting. We're not letting the partnerships interfere with it. We're not letting the partnerships bring down the quality of anything. We want it to actually enhance it in so many different ways. So we always acknowledge that parents are the first educators of their child. We don't denigrate it. We don't talk down about it. We acknowledge that parents are doing the best they can and that they are the first educators of their child, and we are building on what is going on in the home. So if we look at what are the absolute essential needs of children, so we have to understand that we have irreducible needs of all children, and that we have to work out how do we continue to meet those as well as make them better. So chapter 1 of the text goes into this in quite a bit more detail. Now, in today's world, most of us realise that families and children, they're facing different stresses than what we did in the past. We are in danger sometimes of failing our children, and society will pay the price for that. So what do they need? And if they don't get what they need, what's going to happen? So think about the idea that children need ongoing nurturing relationships. We have many different families that are in our world. It doesn't matter what the type of family is, they need an ongoing nurturing relationship. We need physical protection, safety, and regulation. So we have rules and guidelines that help us at schools and childcare centres. We have general societal rules and so on about things with physical protection and so on. But we need to make sure that we are putting in place the right things to guide them. Every child needs to be considered as an individual, and we want to make sure that we are giving them experiences that cater for those. And every experience that we design in a childcare setting or a school setting should be developmentally appropriate. Oftentimes, you will get parents who will say, "Oh, my child's already learnt to read and they're 4." Or, "My child knows all of these words and they can spell all of these words." Is that developmentally appropriate? I've had many times where children start school, but the parents have done different things with them to what we would do at school, and we have to work out how we can balance those two needs out so that we are continuing to work as a partnership about it. Appropriate limits, predictable structures, and reasonable expectations. Those needs are very important for children, and we're finding in society that understanding how to place those needs and adapt and be able to put limits for children, have good structures and expectations, that's something that's really creating a struggle for a lot of parents. A stable, supportive community. It doesn't say family, it says community. It means that having the people around children that they understand and know. And that's why we want to make sure in our childcare setting in particular that we don't have constant staff changes. We want to have the same people there to greet the children in the morning. And we want to make sure that we have an idea of cultural continuity. That's why things like the stolen generation has had such a crucial and negative impact on our Indigenous society. So we had different children that you will meet in your teaching times. I remember one gorgeous little girl who came from a family that was completely dysfunctional. We found out while we were teaching that the father was being particularly abusive to each of the children. The mother was putting up with it because she was also in a very, very poor situation as well. She wasn't able to see any way out of it. The little girl, she developed lots and lots of coping strategies to cope with everything. One of the problems, though, she ended up very small for her age. She wasn't exactly thriving and so on. And she actually developed a real issue with her short-term memory. So she lacked that idea of appropriate limits, predictable structures. She didn't have experiences that were safe for her. She didn't have a stable and supportive community. And when she reached school, her world started to become a little bit safer, but not safe enough. So she had no short-term memory. Her learning was very, very delayed in every area. She was very physically small, and that continued for all of her primary school. So the things that we put in place were not enough to counteract all the things that were going on at home. So if children don't get what they need, they suffer in many, many ways. And we all know that it will have long-term effects for most of those children as well. It's not just something we will see in early years or in primary school. So if we look at our 3 theories on relationships, what we're doing in this course is really looking at the idea of context and how that affects development and how it affects you working with others as well. Because once we understand the context a little bit more, we can make sure that we are dealing with it. So in our text, we've got one that is often referred to as Bronfenbrenner's bioecological theory. And what that looks like is that it's those concentric circles, and it really talks about how we should support the involvement of families, that the biology and the environmental influences affect human growth. So with the case of Emma, she had her biology, yes, it was genetics from certain things, but the environmental influences, they affected her physical and emotional and intellectual growth. There are 5 environmental systems: the microsystems, the mesosystems, the exosystems, the macrosystems, and the chronosystems. Each of those have different interlayering impacts on each other, and then around the outside is the context. So you've explored quite often in your course Vygotsky's dialectical theory. So what we're doing with that is we're looking at the external social world on the child's development. We're gaining the idea that human knowledge is derived from culture. So if we change our cultural point of view, human knowledge starts to change as well. And that therefore our thinking is determined by our social and historical assumptions. So we make certain assumptions about the way the world works, and that's enacted in our actions. The zone of proximal development is taking children and adults through that idea of our already learned knowledge, introducing new knowledge, and working so that we can actually have our new knowledge and our already learned knowledge meet, and that we're not making too big a zone of proximal development, because then the two don't meet. And then we have our family systems theory. And what we're looking at with that is understanding that we have a developmental contextualism. So the child is a transformer, and they are transformed by what happens to them in different ways. And that if something happens to one member of a family, oftentimes even when that member of the family thinks it's a secret or thinks that they're not letting it impact on others, that it will affect all members of a family. And the classic of that is when you will have a parent come to you and say, we're probably going to be separating in the next couple of weeks. The children don't know yet. We haven't told them. And in the back of your mind, you're instantly going, oh my goodness, that makes complete sense as to the behaviour that I have witnessed over the last few months. All of term one, I have been like, what is going on? And then when the mum comes to tell you, you put all the pieces together. So whatever is happening to one member of a family will impact on all others. So it's looking at this idea of cohesion, flexibility, and communication, and how all of them interact, and that whatever is going on is going to have an impact. So let's explore them in a little bit more detail. So our bioecological theory is our Bronfenbrenner. So find your diagram, have a look at the 5 environmental systems, and then let's think about what children need from our families and what families need from society. And then when we also look at it, you can see that there are obstacles that will be potentially impacting on each of those the environmental systems, impact on the child, and so on. So if we have a look at it, we've got our individual sitting in the center. We then have sitting around it things like our mesosystem, which is our microsystem, is our family, and so on. Our mesosystem is all the others that are operating around it. Our exosystem is often operating and pushing things in. So they are things like the media. And we've got social media creating massive impacts at the moment. We've got social welfare services, our different funding agreements, the level of support you get from the government for different things, the level of support schools get, and so on. And then you have your macro systems that are all influencing everything. And that's our societal beliefs, our cultural beliefs, our cultural context. And then the chronosystem is those events back in time that have had a comprehensive effect on the other systems. So in Australia, we have lots of really positive things to do with our school funding, government funding for childcare. Lots of great things go on compared to other places in the world. If you contrast the macro system and exosystems of America with Australia's, they are chalk and cheese. We have such fabulous things go on in our education system, in our support for aged care, our support for the unemployed. They are light years apart. They're still not fabulous, but they're dramatically different. So we had historical events that made them far more positive. So when we think about it, we have to take into account when a child is in our room that there's not just the child and the child's family, but all of those layers that are impacting on a child, and the way that we perceive them, the way that the school perceives them, and so on. And we can't always look at things through a really narrow lens. We have to have a much broader idea of what's going on. So with Vygotsky, if we look in depth at our zone of proximal development, which I know you have done previously, at stage 1, we've got the performances assisted by others. So when they're learning something new, we're helping them. At stage 2, performance is assisted by the child as he or she moves to self-regulation. At stage 3, that task is internalized and you want them to be able to do it by themselves. You want it to be done automatically. And in stage 4, they're becoming lifelong learners and they return to stage 2 to improve or retain skills. And that's what often happens when we're learning new strategies for teaching. We start a new job. For you, it will be when you go on your final school experience, when you will start to take on more of those responsibilities. And all of that, if you replace child by pre-service teacher, it will be that in your first couple of school experiences, your performance is assisted by your mentor teacher. In stage 2, you're going back and you're starting to do it by yourself. But if you keep in mind that it will be influenced by all the other things that are going on around you at that time, and that it will not be automatic or done without conscious thought. It will be hard at the beginning when you go out into your final school experience. And then again, you'll go back to stage 2 when you're going back into your first teaching experience and setting up your first room, or taking on that role as the room leader, or taking on the lead educator in a childcare centre, and so on. We keep in mind that we talk about Vygotsky for a young learner, but those types of things also apply just as much for adults as well. Our family systems theory, because family members exist as a group, what happens to one impacts on each of them. When you have grief in your family, each member of your family goes through grief in different ways, but the grief has affected all of them. And your family changes and morphs over time with different things that have happened to them, sometimes for really positive reasons and sometimes for really negative ones. And so we can't always isolate out those different dimensions of things that make families happy or unhappy. Good functioning families, they have a balance. Poor functioning families, they lack that balance in lots of ways. So let's think about how family engagement is key to partnerships. And I've got a little video, I'm hoping it will play. If it doesn't, I'll keep the video separate. so in summary, early childhood education, it's not about just developing the student themselves, but it's really about developing relationships with the families and the community and forming authentic partnerships. It's not about you holding the power and telling the children what to do and the parents what to do. It's about working together. All children have needs. Those needs have to be met in order for them to learn and reach their potential as fully developed members of society. If they don't have their needs met, then you will see it evidenced in many different ways. The three theories that we're looking at are the bioecological, the dialectic, and the family systems. Each of those three are explained in your textbook, and you can also Google and research a little bit more on those. They will be things that will be a little bit more important as we start to delve into different ways that we develop good relationships and great authentic partnerships with everyone that we are working with when we're in a school or a childcare setting. So thank you, everyone. I will see you all in our tutorials, and we'll be exploring and looking at the experiences we've had and how they colour and give us a different view on the world and different things that children are doing and so on.